A very good morning to one and all present. Today we have gathered for the 81st Study Circle meeting. The topic for today's session is Civil Trial, Examination of Parties, Admissions, Interrogatories, Discovery and Issues. Our resource person for the day is Dr. N.V. Badarinath, former Presiding Officer, DRT1 Chennai. This meeting is a continuation of the series on proceedings in civil suit. I now invite Mr. Vaidyanathan to give the welcome address and a brief introduction of the speaker.
A very good morning to all the participants, seniors, and my legal fraternities. As I am much glad to welcome you all to the 81st webinar lecture series on law conducting by the study circle. Meet to dilute the pandemic situation by fabric or intellectual argument. In this core, this session comprises the topic of civil trial, examination of parties, admissions, interrogatories, discovery, and issues, which are inevitable and covers the imperative part of civil trial. The speaker on the subject is Dr. N.V. Badarinath, former presiding officer, DRT1 at Chennai. It is not necessary to introduce the speaker of this session to his uniqueness in exploring the subject. He interprets the topic not just on shallow layer, but profundity, which takes beyond the persuasion and propounds the perspectives. For instance, in his previous session of the study circle on pleadings in civil suits, part 3, on the amendment of pleadings under Order 6, Rule 17 of CPC, to define the same, we cited two precedents. One is the Akshaya Restaurant versus P. Anjanappa and other is Gautam Sarup versus Leela Jetli, and other to amend the admissions in written statement wherein dealt with merits and demerits of both the plaintiff and defendant of the suit with various supplementaries, which clarifies the law of all its peers and foster the participants into considerable intensity over the civil trials. And I hope the resource person will make today's session also be a feast to the listeners. And sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Vaidyanathan, and good morning to all of you. Well, I'm happy to see all so many allied faces today who have come to listen to me. But let me tell you, I'm here to share what little I know and learn more from you, because you are the persons who are going to question me my talk at an appropriate time. So, while welcoming you all to this session on a topic which in my view is an important one for the lawyers who are appearing in the trial court, that is examination of parties, admissions, interrogatories, discovery, and issues. Well, this topic I thought of after the organizers have informed me whether it is possible to continue the discussion that I had with you all on institution of plaint and pleadings in a civil suit. So I thought that, well, it's a good opportunity to learn the subject on these interrogatories, discoveries, examination of parties, and framing of issues. So I readily accepted it. But as usual, I confess my limitations on my discourse on this topic. But nevertheless, I will try to make it lively and useful to the young lawyers who are eager to know something on this subject. Well, friends, we have just to get back to what we have earlier discussed, right? We said a list which is purely civil is instituted before a court by filing a document called plaint. And in reply, what is filed is the written statement. That is how a civil list is born in a court of law. And that can be done by a party himself or by a an authorized agent recognized under the law. Right. And then just to have some recap of what we had discussed and to have some foundation for today's discussion, I just prepared a flow chart, and it is very much known to all of you. But as I said, for today's discussion and as a prelude for my further talk, I want to take you all to that flow chart, and I request that it be shown on the screen so that we will just have a look at that before we go to the topic of the day. Yes. Now, this is the chart which you are able to see on the screen. As I said, and all of you know, registering of a suit, what happens is first the institution of a suit by a party in person or through an advocate. Then the process of registering of a suit by the court, and then issuance of summons to the defendants. A well-known procedure, nothing much to explain. Next, after the summons were issued, according to me, there will be 3 stages. Stage 1 is when summon sent to the defendant is served. Stage 2 is summon served to the defendant, but defendant was not present. Then stage 3 is summons returned unserved. So these are the 3 stages. Let us take the stage 1, summons served, but the parties have appeared either in person or through an advocate. And then once they appear, then there is a opportunity given to them to file a written statement within 30 days from the date of receipt of summons, or 60 days on petition, or within such period as extended by the court. And then this written statement shall be accompanied by supporting documents and evidences. After this stage, then we have the opportunity for the plaintiff to file a rejoinder or objections, if any, to the written statement that is filed by the defendant. Thereafter, both parties have got an opportunity to file admissions and denial of documents. Admission and denial of documents. This is a stage that when a plaintiff, in response to the summon issued, the defendants appear either by themselves or through a lawyer. After the process of admissions and denial is concluded, then it will be the duty of the court to frame the issues, taking the contentious issues from the pleadings, and the advocates can render necessary assistance at that stage. Then after that, there is a filing of evidence affidavit by the plaintiff, examination in chief, and cross-examination. Apart from examination of the plaintiff, there is also a provision for summoning the other witnesses if they are not able to file their affidavits or not willing to file their affidavits. They can be examined orally in chief before the court. And then there will be a cross-examination of that witness by the defendants. And then there is also a possibility of summoning third-party witnesses, either by the plaintiff or by the defendant. And then the defendant, also like the plaintiff, files the chief affidavit and will be subjected to cross-examination. Thereafter, there will be hearing, either oral or in the form of a written documents, and then the judgment. These are the known steps that are in a normal civil proceeding. Now, let us see the next stage, where a summon is served, but the parties have not appeared. Court is satisfied with the service of summon. Then the defendant will be called and set ex parte, and then the plaintiff will be heard and judgment will be passed. All the steps like framing of issues and etc. will not arise, because when we discuss that in the point of issues, when the defendants have not put up their defense, it's not obligatory on the part of the court to frame issues. That we'll again discuss in detail when we go to order 14. Then we have another stage, summons returned unserved. Now these unserved summons were for want of maybe various reasons, sometimes address incorrect, parties out of station. That depends on, depending upon the endorsement that the court receives, the court will decide whether there is sufficient service or not. If in the opinion of the court that someone requires to be resent, the court will order a fresh summon. And even after ordering fresh summon, if it is found that it is not possible to serve the defendant by the process and normal process, then the court at the behest of the applicant even may order substituted service, that is notice through publication in a newspaper having circulation in the area where the party resides or carries on his or her business. Then even after that such service, if the defendant fails to turn up, then that defendant will be set ex parte, and again the plaintiff will be heard and the matter will be disposed of. This is how the court proceeds. Now this is all you know. In this process, we are now talking about a situation where the defendant entered appearance, filed a reply statement, and resisted the suit. So what the court should do? This is, as you know, that a trial and a hearing, trial and in fact to put it more precisely, first hearing, there is a slight difference. If you examine the scheme under the Code of Civil Procedure, you find the thin difference between a trial and first hearing. Though both stages look similar, there are certain differences which I will try to explain with the help of the provisions in the CPC and also a ruling of the Supreme Court. Now, we are now talking about, firstly, the hearing of the parties. See, hearing of the parties and trial. When the law had said hearing of the parties, you know, parties means the suitor and the defendant. You don't include the third parties such as witnesses. So that is one distinction that we find when the legislature has carefully and consciously used the word first hearing. Learned young lawyers, please understand these stages very carefully, because you are preparing for a battle called the trial. You have to equip yourself fully and sufficiently to win the case for your client, be that a suitor, be that a defendant. So you need to know this very thoroughly. And some of these provisions, if one understands and uses or tell the court to press into use, then the process of trial would become more and more easier and also very effective and less time consuming. So this is a very, very important. Now, that's why I've chosen the caption hearing of the parties. Now, for that purpose, let us first take, we are not talking about trial now. We are talking about hearing of the parties. By whom? The court will have to hear the parties. For what? Why should it hear? Is it mandatory that we should respond to what the court? Or if we say we don't answer the questions in the hearing that the court intends to put, then what are the consequences? Can we not say that why should I disclose my case now? I will reserve it for trial. Like this, several questions may crop up. But let me tell you, this procedure of hearing parties is so useful, and it makes either the suitor or the defendant so clear about his case and on what issues he has to fight and what issues he need not even fight. Or I would say whether he should go for a trial or not, whether he can settle the matter even without going to the trial. Such a wonderful thing. That is Order 10. Many courts will or rather bypassing this Order 10. My focus is more on Order 10 because it makes the trial so comfortable, and as I already said, it in a very short time frame we can complete the trial and get relief to the parties. Let us now go into this examination of parties. Now please uh, show Order 10. Right. Now, if you see this, right, at the first hearing of the suit, the court shall ascertain from each party or his pleader. Here is the role of the advocate, because once you accept wakalat, you are the mouthpiece of the party. Your admissions are binding unless it is proved that you have done without instructions or with malafide intention. That's a separate subject. But generally, let us take that you are the mouthpiece and your admissions do bind the party. So the legislature has included that not only from each party means the plaintiff or the defendant or his pleader, whether he admits or denies such allegations of fact as are made in the plain or written statement, if any, of the opposite party, and as are not expressly or by necessary implication admitted or denied by the party against whom they are made, then the court shall record such admission and denials. See, we have discussed in our last three lectures that admission unequivocal, unless explained satisfactorily, is binding on the party. So this Order 10 Rule 1 is not aiming at those admissions. Whatever is admitted in the written statement or in the plaint, that court will not go into it. But the court will go into certain aspects after a holistic reading of the both statement as well as the plaint, and say to the parties whether you wanted to admit something, whether you don't want to admit something, basing on the pleadings, right? So we need to see here one important thing. Take a suit based on a promissory note. In the promissory note, the plaintiff asserted due execution, receipt of consideration by the defendants, and failure to pay despite demand. The demand also is supported by a legal notice and a reply to that, or service of legal notice but no reply to it. That is the case of the plaintiff. But the defendant in the reply statement has denied it and said, I have not executed, I have not received any consideration. So it is very clear. One person asserted, other person denied. So an issue can be framed on various, on the execution and passing of the consideration and other things, if limitation and etc. etc. Now, this is generally done, but we are not discussing that role. In spite of such things, the court can ascertain from each party whether, before going to the trial, would you like that the matter be admitted on any other aspects. For instance, in a promissory note, there may be situations where the due execution is not in controversy, but the quantum of amount is controversy. It's I have executed promissory note for 5,000 rupees, but the defendant had made it 50, plaintiff had made it 50,000. So the controversy is whether the promise, what is the amount that was passed as consideration, and whether there is a forgery. Or there could be, I have discharged 50,000 as against the borrowal of 1 lakh. So the controversy is 50,000. So these are the things, like situations if the court finds, and if lawyers finds, they can take it to the notice of the court, and then the court in such situations can ask the parties that you can resort to a kind of alternative dispute resolution mechanism called ADR, envisaged under section 89(1) of the CPC. See, that is why today, after the judgment of the Supreme Court in Arcon's case by Justice Santosh Hegde, what they are doing is, I don't know the practice in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra Pradesh, the court is putting a one more step addition after the reply statements are filed and before the issues are framed, say for settlement. Sometimes they are posting that even after framing issues also. But be that whatever it may, yet an opportunity is given. This is because, notwithstanding the admissions denials, if the court by reading it feels that somewhere there is an element of settlement, then the court can. So it refers to the ADR mechanism, and then that ADR will be under the guidance, under the directions of the court within a time frame. And then if it is settled, then a decree will be passed. If not settled, then the matter will come back within the time frame, and then the court will try that in a normal course. That is one part of examination, one purpose of examination. Okay, the court felt after reading the plain and written statement, there's no point in hearing the parties on referring the matters to ADR after having made a note. So then it can still hear the parties. That is under Order 10 Rule 2, which is very vital for our discussion today, because a matter settled in ADR, it is fine, because the parties have done it and we only give the legal seal to it, and then that becomes an executable decree if required to be executed. Then come to 10.2. 10.2 is a very important thing. It says oral examination of party or companion party. At the first hearing of the suit, the court shall, with a view to elucidating matters in controversy in the suit, examine orally each of the parties to the suit appearing in person or present in the court as it deems fit. Well, let us go to the example I have said, a outright assertion of execution of pro note, passing of consideration by the suitor, and then the outright denial of execution and plea of non-receipt of consideration by the defendant. So such situations, Order 10 Rule 2 will be invoked, rather should be invoked in my view by the court, and then call upon the parties and then elucidate the matters in controversy in the suit. Examine orally, it can as well examine them orally. And then apart from, and while examining, what is this oral examination? This oral examination is putting questions. The court can frame its own questions and put it to the parties at that stage, remember. And I will also show you what the evidentiary value it, how it can be used, where it can be used, and when it can be used. The law is very clear on it. So the court can, despite there is a strong contest, it can still ask the parties whether by some questions regarding the controversy. This is not with an intention of settlement. That is only under the 1. Now this is a different purpose. You will know it better once we see the rest of the provisos to this Order 10. So it can assert from the parties the controversies involved in the matter. Then B, may orally examine any person. It can, notwithstanding these two, it can, if it feels, can orally examine by itself, not it is by the chief or cross-examination. We are not going into that process. The court can examine, then may orally examine any person able to answer any material question relating to the suit by whom any party appearing in person or present in court or his pleader is accompanied. So it can ask questions which it feels necessary for the purpose of resolution of the controversy, not to perpetuate it, but it's to resolve it. Then this is one stage. This is a pre-hearing state. First hearing, we are talking about a stage of first hearing. That's why at both the stages, the court used the word first hearing. Now, before we go to sub rule 2 of rule 2 of order 10, let us go to, let us hear now, let us know here what is meant by first hearing, so that the second step will be, we can understand it much better and with ease, more ease. Now, we have a judgment of the Supreme Court on what is meant by first hearing. That is reported in, it is Mangal Singh versus Satpal, AAR 2003, Supreme Court, page 4300. In this case, the court had said what is meant by first hearing. The first hearing of a suit means, first hearing, we are not going to the trial. The first hearing of a suit means the day on which the court goes into the pleadings of the parties to, in order to ascertain their contentions. That is why I said, when the court reads the pleadings of both sides, in order to ascertain the, what is the crux of the contention, what are the contentious points raised by both sides, pleas raised by both sides. You all know very well when it is done. It is done before framing of the issues, because till then court won't, rather court will not have the occasion to read it. But that is the reason why Order 10 mandated the court to not to wait till you frame the issues. You need, once a stage of exchanging of pleadings is complete, you need to go through that, lest Order 10 will become redundant, meaningless. Order 10 envisages, don't put off the things till trial. So it is not necessary that only till issues are framed, or at the stage of framing the issues, it is required on the part of the court to read the plaint, but even before. That is why the judgment, it said, the first hearing of a suit means the day on which the court goes into pleadings of the parties in order to ascertain their contentions. The day on which such issues are framed is the first hearing of the suit held by the Supreme Court in AR 2003. That's what I have just placed before you. You find that here in this 11th para. See, whatever the stage of issues, before that, the court, if the court is able to read the plaint for the purpose of invoking the Order 10, that is the first hearing. So at the first hearing means the court, when it reads and before the matter is taken to trial, then the court has got an obligation to examine the parties to ascertain what are the controversies involved. Then let us get back to again Order 10, Rule 2, Sub Rule 2. This is another stage where the examination of parties is involved. It says at any subsequent hearing. So first hearing, not only at first hearing, let us see 10 Sub Rule 2. Sub Rule 2. At any subsequent hearing. So not only at the stage of first hearing, if required, even at a later stage, at any subsequent hearing, the court may orally examine any party appearing in person or present in the court who is able to answer any material question relating to the suit. So this power is available to the court at any subsequent stage also. Now, then what will happen after the examination? The court puts certain questions, then the answers given will have to be recorded. That is what we have in subrule 3. The substance of examination shall be reduced to writing by the judge and shall form part of the record. So this is the part of the record. The court will, before the matter goes to trial, they will examine parties, and then, or at a later stage even, examine the parties, and then by putting questions, and the substance of it will be recorded, and that shall form part of the record. Next, then what happens? Supposing a party is not willing to answer, a pleader is not willing to answer on behalf of the party, then what are the consequences? Because sometimes we tend to skip this, or we intend to skip this. In such situations, what the law says, let us see. Consequences or refusal or inability of pleader to answer. Of course, this section includes both parties as well as pleaders. Where a pleader of any party who appears, or any such person accompanying a pleader as referred to under subrule 2, refuses or unable to answer any material question relating to the suit, which the court is of the opinion that party whom he represents are to answer, and is likely to be able to answer if interrogated in person, the court may postpone the hearing of the suit to a day not later than 7 days from the date of first hearing, and direct that such party shall appear in person on such day. See, what happens is sometimes the party through a lawyer, or a lawyer appearing for the party, may find difficult or may not be inclined to answer for a variety of reasons. So in such case, it is open to the court to defer it by sometime not later than 7 days, and call that person to appear in person, and then see what happens if he appears and what happens if he doesn't appear. What are the consequences? If such person fails without lawful excuse to appear in person on the day so appointed, the court may pronounce judgment against him or make such order in relation to suit as it thinks fit. Of course, the word used is may. So in the opinion of the court, his absence deserves that the judgment, either in his favor or something different or otherwise, be passed. It can do so, or it can pass such order as it thinks fit. So understand, this is an important step from the viewpoint of reducing the burden of trial and thrashing out the disputes at the threshold, and the advantage of it being that within a short period a matter gets disposed of. This is the essence of this order 10. Therefore, invoking order 10 by the court and with the help of the lawyers will have two benefits. One is the matter can be referred to ADR mechanism and get it resolved, or alternatively, the court can put questions to the parties and then decide the matter. But let me tell you, it is not mandatory for the court to dismiss a suit or decree a suit when answer is given or answer is not given. There is no such power given to the court. The court can make such order as it feels. It may record something and then leave it on the record of the particular case, and that can be appropriately taken advantage of by whoever wants during the course of the trial. That's all. But the object is to settle the matter at the threshold. So with this brief discussion, we will conclude the topic examination of parties. This is more or less the role of the court. Of course, advocates have to assist. Now let us come to the next part, discovery and inspection, right? Wherein this is this discovery and inspection. Now, see, when, as I said, when you prepare for the battle called trial, you need to have all the ammunition in your hand. Unless you are armed with that ammunition, probably you will not be able to fight effectively. So this ammunition is can be acquired pre-trial and during trial, or while trial goes on. Right. While trial goes on, you have the weapon called cross-examination, and you use that and try to impeach the witness to the maximum extent you want. That is. But before that also you have got several such opportunities. And that is called, that is through discovery. That is through discovery. In fact, discovery is a broad concept or a process which includes the what we call interrogatories. Interrogatories aim at discovery. So a part of discovery is interrogatories. Then inspection is different. That is why the chapter 11 is under the topic discovery and inspection. Now, let us take a detail. Let us go into little more details of this interrogatories. Now, this is again a pre-trial process, as I just said. Now, before we go to the details, let us briefly examine what is the purpose, object of serving interrogatories by either parties, either of the parties to the suit, on the opposite parties. So let us first see the purpose. Now, I will explain this with the help of a judgment of two judgments. That is one by the Orissa High Court and one by the Honorable Supreme Court. Let us see what it is said in AR 1991, Orissa, page 319, where in this the object is explained like this. The object of interrogatories is twofold. One, to understand the nature of the case of the opponent. So, in order to understand the nature of the case of the opponent, interrogatories are served. Number two, to support his own case, either directly or by obtaining admissions, and indirectly to destroy the case of the opponent. So, remember, a trial is not the only place or the only source or only occasion for you to destroy the case or establish your case or destroy the opposite party's case. It is by serving, it is also available to you pre-trial, that is by serving what you call interrogatories. So what then, how to serve these interrogatories? What is the procedure and in what form and in what shape they have to be served? And what can be ascertained through interrogatories? This will be the scope of our discussion. Now, let us get, I will refer to the Supreme Court case, Rajnarayan's case, little later. Before that, I just gave you an idea of what is the purpose of serving interrogatories by referring to that Orissa High Court judgment. Now let us get back to the proviso itself. discovery and inspection. In any suit, the plaintiff or the defendant, by leave of the court, may deliver interrogatories in writing for examination of the opposite parties or one or more of such opposite parties. And such interrogatories, when delivered, shall have a note at the foot there stating that which of such interrogatories each of such person required to answer. So interrogatories are, see, from the background of the pleadings, you can pick up certain questions which you feel, if answered or denied by the other side, will have the benefit for you during the course of the trial, or to strengthen your case or weaken the other side case. You can resort to interrogatories. It is not mandatory in every case that one should exhaust this step, but I can certainly tell, if you serve interrogatories, you will have more clarity on the trial. You will have more clarity on the strength and weakness in your case. So also on the opposite party's case. So it is desirable to invoke order 11 and serve interrogatories. Now, what is this process? How this process takes place? Now, take for instance an eviction suit. You are a suitor. So as a plaintiff lawyer, you wanted the tenant to be evicted as expeditiously as possible. Then you are also a lawyer for the defendant, a section of here, a lawyer present here, or also will be the lawyers for the defendant. And the defendant wanted to squat on the property as long as he can. So in this scenario, what will be the advantage of serving the interrogatories, either by the plaintiff or by the defendant? For instance, if the case of the suitor that so-and-so is a tenant and tenancy is governed under the Transfer of Property Act, I have given a quit notice, or the lease expired by a flex of time, therefore there is no need for issuing quit notice. And this is the quantum of rent which he is supposed to pay, but he has not paid nor vacated. Therefore, after expiry of the period mentioned in the quit notice, I have instituted the suit. Then the defendant comes with a plea that I'm not a tenant. Quit notice is not valid. I'm not paying the rent. This comes. The plaintiff claimed that the defendant paid rent by way of checks, and he has also not either filed them or mentioned them in his plate. Despite that, the defendant says, I'm not a tenant. The payments under the checks, if any, does not represent the rent. It may at best. So in this backdrop, one way for you is to take the matter to the trial and put all questions on tenancy, on issuance of check and get. But before that, let us see, if you resort to interrogatories, either the defendant or the plaintiff, whoever it is, would it help you more? Would it make the trial more easier? Would it make your case more stronger and the defendant's case weaker? Likewise, if you are a defendant, would it make your case more stronger and the suitor's case weaker? So in this backdrop, let us see what role the interrogatories play. You know, interrogatories is in the form of a questions. There is a format given. First of all, you have to obtain the leave. It is not automatic. You have to prepare your questions, what you want to ask. List your questions serially and then file a petition for leave. Because without the leave of the court, you can't deliver these interrogatories on the defendant. So you have to list your questions, maybe 1 to 10 or 10, 20, 40 or 30, whatever it is. Then file it. then it is for the court to grant you leave after giving notice to the defendant. And while giving you leave, the court may allow you to put all the 40 questions you have listed, or it may delete a few, say not relevant, and then say reduce it to 20 or 25. It is the depends upon the type of question, nature of dispute, and the contest, etc. So the court will, when permitted you to put some questions and serve them on the defendants, and it becomes obligatory for the defendant to answer. So let us take a hypothetically a case where you are permitted to raise 10 questions to the defendant out of the 15 list you have given. Court refused 5. It allowed 10. Now these 10 questions you will have to serve. You know, there is a format. I think that can be exhibited. There is a form. We have form 2 of appendix C. You have appendix to the Code of Civil Procedure. Form 2 appendix C, you can raise. Yeah, you can see this. And then there is a format. You have to strictly adhere to that format. That by referring, you will know that not much difficulties. Let us say you complied that. Then what would be the questions that you can ask? See, here is a contest where he said that I have not paid any rent. I'm not a tenant at all. Let us say such a blunt defense has been taken. Now, what could be the interrogatories in that? There is a backdrop of a check given by him. Now, you can prepare certain questions saying that you are having account in so-and-so bank, right? Yes. That man may say yes or no. It is for him to say. That bank would be the bank where you got the check. So you know the check. Without disclosing the bank name, you can, by disclosing the bank's name, you can say you have an account in so-and-so bank. That man has to invariably say yes. If he says no, you can know the demeanor of that witness, because the check that you have will reflect that bank name. So you will get one confirmation. In the cross-examination, you need not ask that question. Next, you can put one more question. Is there any commercial transaction between you or any other transaction of money between you both? Then that man, unless he assets something in the written statement, he can't say anything. Yes, I have like that. If he says also, it will not be correct because his written statement did not contain it. So he will necessarily have to say no. If he says yes, he has to establish. Let us say he said yes, it is for him to establish. You are sure that you don't have any commercial. So if these two questions you get an answer, then what is the conclusion one can draw? When there is no other transaction between you and these checks are coming up and the rent you said in the plane is reflected in the check, there is a possibility, a strong inference can be drawn that this check is issued as towards a rent only. If rent is established, the relationship is tenant-landlord. Therefore, like that, I'm just giving as with your competency, you can frame better questions. I'm just giving a hypothetical answer. So you see these in trial, how much burden is reduced. You need not go to all these questions. Straight away, you can draw the attention of the court while the trial at the time of cross-examination. Yeah, these are all the things he has admitted or denied through the interrogatories. Therefore, I'm not required to ask much. Or if he says something else, you can say how contradictory the witness is. So this way, it eases the trial, and then the only issue would be then what? Whether the defendant is speaking truth. When the check circumstances are established, then the cross-examination role necessity will not be much, because the cross-examination is no doubt the sharpest tool that a lawyer has to destroy the case of the plaintiff or the defendant, as the case may be. So, but that sometimes the cross-examination proves fatal at times, because it is always said in the cross-examination, one should know what not to ask rather than what to ask. Because if you ask something which one is not supposed to ask, then that would be fatal. If you forget, doesn't matter, that can be covered later. Then Secondly, the cross-examination is something that the answers you get on the spot. At times, parties, the lawyers or the parties, sometimes parties act smart. Sometimes the lawyers' questions would be so smart that the necessary foundation already laid by one plaintiff or the defendant would be destroyed by one answer. That is also, therefore, to avoid all such kind of things, you can, by serving interrogatories, get some answers. We will go into the what is the binding effect of these interrogatories, etc. It is very shortly. But before that, I am telling the purpose here. Now, see, when it comes to cross examination, I recollect one incident which I think it may be useful if I quote here. The strain that the lawyer takes in establishing a case sometimes totally go out of control or gets destroyed by a small incidents in the cross examination. I'll place this before you. A case of tenant and landlord is being tried in a court. This man denied, I'm not a tenant, I'm not all that as usual defenses, all umpteen defenses available on the earth. He took it and he's not vacating. So it found very tough for the plaintiff to lawyer to find how we can get out. After all the factual aspects, he did all the cross examination very perfectly, and the defendants thought that the answers he gave will be more helpful to him rather than it. In fact, it more or less it appeared so until that stage that the defendant was in a better position. At that stage, this was the cross examination was going on. It was a case where a person not vacating the premises. So after regular routine questions, these are the questions. The question was by the plaintiff lawyer to the defendant tenant. Are you in possession of this apartment? Yes, I'm in possession. Are you married? Yes, I'm married. There is a woman staying along with you in your house. That man replied, yes. Then the next question is, that woman is not your wife? This man said, yes. That, do you have children? He said, no. And the woman staying in your house, in that flat, is not your sister, is not your mother? He said, yes. He left it at that. He didn't ask further questions. And then the lawyer for the defendant also did not opt for re-examination. So the background is, he is married, but his wife is not staying with him. There is a woman staying in the house, and she can't be his daughter, has no children. And she is not a sister, not mother. But some woman is staying along with in the flat. The lawyer for the plaintiff left at that. Then the defendant lawyer, after the court work, when the client came, he asked him, see, who is that lady? He also got it out, some illicit connection or something. Judge may get prejudiced. He's staying with some woman. His wife is somewhere like that. So if the judge might have got prejudiced about his stay in the house. So the lawyer asked him, defendant lawyer. Then this man said, sir, she is my grandmother. Then why did you say that in the court? Then said, he has not asked. A lawyer did not get clarified. So judge got something prejudiced in that. See, these are the things that sometimes we miss in the cross-examination. But again, filing a petition for re-examination and allowing it, that is a Herculean task. Court may not, because re-examination has to be done then and there. We can't again have an application for re-examination. So, see, these are sometimes the handicaps that we face. A simple re-examination at that stage then would have been enough saying his grandmother, then judge will never get prejudiced. Now a prejudice has been caused in the mind of the judge that this man is staying with some woman who is not related. So this is the thing that in the cross-examination, sometimes it happens, sometimes I've taken it in a lighter thing. But this happened in a court. This quoted in a judgment by Justice L. Narasimha Reddy from Andhra Pradesh High Court. So I remember that. That's why I quoted it. Citation right now I don't have, but suddenly it struck my mind. Therefore, I quoted it. I tell you why. If you go for interrogatories, these kind of things can be. You can either lay a foundation for some clarity, and you can also lay a foundation for the trend of the cross-examination. So interrogatories, within another 5 minutes, I will conclude these interrogatories, how it has to be served, and what is the effect of answering it, what is the effect of not answering it. And I also wanted to take you to one judgment of the Andhra Pradesh High Court before I conclude. That will give a clarity, because learned youngsters, I wanted you to read and understand. I'm only giving you the broad features, outline, a sketch, a synopsis, and it is for you to read further. So with the help of the inputs that I am now placing before you, I'm sure when you read the ruling, when you read the section, you understand better than what I'm now explaining to you, right? Now, let us see. Let us get back. So interrogatories can be served in the form of a questions as for the format. Now, let us quickly go into the aspect. What is the consequence of refusal to answer to the interrogatories? Now, for that purpose, we will have to go to Rule 21. Rule 22, 20, 21 and 22, both are relevant, of Order 11, Sub-Rule 21. Now, non-compliance with the order of discovery. So, a discovery as well as interrogatories, both, this section covers both. When the interrogatories are delivered, they are given vague answers or not given answer. Vague answers can be answered, directed to be answered again by serving another, one more time, the questionnaire. But if he fails to answer it, then what are the consequences? Let us read Sub-Rule 21. Where any party fails to comply with any order to answer interrogatories or for discovery we'll discuss later, he shall, if a plaintiff be liable to have suit dismissed for want of prosecution, and if a defendant to have his defense, if any, struck out and be placed in the same position as if he had not defended, and the party interrogating or seeking discovery or inspection may apply to the court for an order to the effect. So first thing is, if he fails to answer the interrogatories, be that a plaintiff, be that a defendant, if he is a plaintiff non-suited, if he is a defendant, his defense be struck off, then the party applied for interrogatories must make another application to the court saying, despite the direction of this court to serve the interrogatories and on service, he has not answered this. Therefore, struck off the dismiss the suit or struck off the written statement, as the case may be. You have to file a separate application. After that, thereafter, what the court can do, and then seeking discovery inspection, the court for an order to the effect, then the court, after notice to the parties and after giving them a reasonable opportunity of being heard, then pass such an order. What is the order? It can dismiss the suit, it can struck off the defense, but that will be with a notice. So in case the interrogatories are not answered, you need to file another application and then ask the court to struck off or dismiss, as the case may be. And then on that, the court, after hearing both parties, will take and pass an appropriate order. So see, this is a very powerful tool if you invoke, but it is, as I said, it's not mandatory always. Now, this legal position you get from the ruling of the another judgment from Andhra Pradesh High Court. This is reported in 2006 SEC AP, page 185. Kuchumanchi Subbarao versus K. Prabhakar Rao. This is, you find. Para 4, you find, please read para 4, what I said, you find here. Then, as I said earlier, there is one ruling on this by Honorable Supreme Court on interrogatories. And then, since I explained about the cross-examination, before I conclude, let me quote this. This is a famous case of Raj Narayan versus Indira Gandhi. AR 1972, 3 Supreme Court, page 850. This is interrogatories. Now, a question may arise. What you wanted, there are rather certain questions which can be asked in the cross-examination, can also be asked in the form of interrogatories. Now, what the Supreme Court said, see in this, para 26. Questions that may be relevant during cross-examination are not necessarily relevant as interrogatories. Last but one paragraph. 26. Yes. Questions that may be relevant during cross-examination are not necessarily relevant as interrogatories. So please don't get mixed up with the questions that you ask in the cross-examination. Cross-examination depends upon the chief affidavit and the situation, and you would tend to go beyond the certain things, as I said in this case, an example case. But in interrogatories, that is the only the relevant, directly connected to the issue, directly connected the matters in controversy. But cross-examination, to get into your point, you need to sometimes beat around the bush, and then I suddenly put the question. That's why this judgment is very, very useful in helping, in trying to find the difference between interrogatories as well as interrogatories and the questions for cross-examination. Therefore, I read it this. Questions that may be relevant during cross-examination are not necessarily relevant as interrogatories. The only questions that are relevant as interrogatories are those relating to any matters in question. Matters in question only come under these interrogatories. Therefore, don't go to the other events which you may require to take to the notice of the party during the cross-examination, because that's the only situation where you need not put the party on notice what you are going to ask. We have a provision under the Indian Evidence Act, but in interrogatories, it must be from what the pleadings contain, that only, like the bank account, the check, all that kind of details which we have discussed. Therefore, that is the distinction. And then the difference between a trial and that, apart from the Odisha judgment, we also have a judgment of the Supreme Court on that. Please read this also. Kailash versus Nakku and others, 2005 SEC, page 480. Please read para 13. Now, this judgment, most of you are aware, under this judgment, Supreme Court said the 90 days time prescribed under the amended CPC is not mandatory but directory. In this judgment itself, in para 13, the court explained, just one line I read, then para 13. In a civil suit, the trial begins when issues are framed and the case is set down for recording the evidence. So that is trial. We are talking about first hearing. So there is a distinction between when in a civil suit, trial begins when issues are framed and the case is set down for recording of evidence. Issues framed and case is set down for recording evidence. So pre-trial stage is called a hearing. That's why we referred about order 10, first hearing. Now then trial. Now we are left with the other subtopic, discovery. I think we can defer it to the next sessions, and we can have some questions on this if anyone has.
If anyone has any questions, they can post the questions on the chat box or raise their hands and then I'll unmute you.
Mr. Murugan,
can I have one clarification, sir?
Yes, sir.
In a part of a suit, if suppose two of the defendants submit to the decree and they are ready to depose before the court that they are agreeing to the relief sought for by the plaintiff. Can that be part of a record in order 10 as to examination of parties? A partial decree.
Yes, partial decrees is always permissible. In fact, that is the object of Order 10. Thrash out the contentious issues to the minimum and then send those issues only to trial. If a part of the claim is, that should be severable from the other relief, it should not affect the other relief. Can be granted at the behest of both the parties, sir. I think the court can pass because number of interim decrees can be passed. Number of decrees can be passed. Only
So
judgment
that
can
submission to the decree can be part of the examination under Order 10.
Order 10, if they say that the court at that stage can send the matter to ADR under 89(1) and then get the same result and then pass a decree to that extent. 89(1) except for arbitration, the court cannot send it for arbitration. But now there is an amendment also because Afghan's case I didn't strongly refer it because I had to know I remember I read a few months back that Supreme Court has revisited Afghan's case. In Afghan's construction's case, I remember it is 2011 Supreme Court by Justice Santosh Hegde. He said arbitration under 89(1) statutory arbitration cannot be resorted to under 89(1) except that rest can be done. Mediation, conciliation, all kind of things can be done. So a case like this can be sent for conciliation, mediation, and then can be an interim award can be passed to that extent, and the rest of the issues can be tried. I'm sure that to that extent can be done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have Mr. Chandramouli. He has a question. You've been unmuted, sir.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Yes, good afternoon.
It might be a silly question, but just I have a doubt, sir. This interrogatories is an optional step before the cross-examination, or is it a compulsory, sir?
No, it is always optional.
Okay.
Nowhere it is set mandatory. Unless you serve interrogatories, you can't take part in the trial. See, it is Order 10 aims at reducing the burden on the trial. That's why I said you have ease trial. Why you go to so many questions? You can as well see you can serve interrogatories and also go for trial. But by interrogatories, matter will not be resolved. No, controversies will remain. It's a process whereby the controversy gets diluted, minimized, or gets more and more clarified. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And interrogatories are binding to that extent. Right.
Thank you, sir.
There is another question from Mohammed.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you can ask the question.
Can the plaintiff or the defendant ask any question which are not the knowledge or accusations of the other party? Might be in the knowledge of witness through the interrogatories.
No. Interrogatories. That's why I have drawn a distinction of the Supreme Court in Rajnarayan's case. The matters in direct controversy will form part of interrogatories. So there is no question of a person not having knowledge. You have to, supposing in a promissory note case or in an injunction suit or a tenant landlord case, both sides put up their pleadings. So the controversies are known. So the questions must aim at these. You can cleverly put that question to elicit some answer, even though it may or may not be in the knowledge. But what is relevant is the question must be in controversy, relating to an aspect in controversy, right? The test is not whether he has a knowledge or no knowledge. He can reply, I have no knowledge. That's all, if he doesn't have. But the test here is the controversial issues only can be put in the form of questions. What will be the controversial issues? Reading plain and written statement. So if one has no knowledge, he can simply say, I have no knowledge. Answer is no knowledge. I do not know. Because it's no compulsion that you should necessarily answer it. Right. That's I think that way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So I think that seems to be the end of the question answer session. I would now like to invite Mr. Vaidyanathan to render the vote of thanks. Sir, you have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
The resource person of the day took us to all along the provisions and provisos of CPC under Order 10 and Order 11, with the plethora of precedents, with rarer in the rarest cases, be it Amangat Singh Trilokachan case to mandate Order 10 of CPC, Bhakta Charan Mali case for interrogatories and discoveries under Order 11 of CPC, where he covers diametrically, concisely, without any divergence from the topic. And it has been a wonderful treat to the participants, especially the developing advocates like me, to tone our knowledge about law, particularly in civil trial. Whereas there is a notion about practicing the part in civil trial, it is an ocean and it is tough to stumble in such career. But our speaker of the session blasted such as an illusion substantiated by his exhaustive lecturership with perspective presentation and a vivid vocabulary illustrating the civil trial from its basic stages of procedures, also advised what to be done and what to be done, not to bypass the proceedings, whichever not taught even during my studies in last colleges. He saturated the oxygen into the lungs of the young lawyers like me to sustain in the battle of the civil trial as well in the profession to discharge the justice efficiently. Thank you very much, sir, for more efficient sessions. Further, I have submit my sincere thanks to the organizers of the study circle in offering me the opportunity to participate in this intellectual intrigues to enhance myself by addressing welcome note as well as vote of thanks of this webinar. And also further, in the voice of the participants, as a study circle organizing the virtual series with the consultation of the eminent organizers under selective subjects rather than picking the topic by cleromancy. Elective eminent resource persons within the stipulated time and durations to enhance the participants to participate without any hurdle. Thank you very much to the study circle meet on behalf of the wide participants to this meet. Thank you very much to the participants to imparting themselves to shine their knowledge. Thank you all once again.
With the permission, one participant has a question here. Mr. Rudula has been there.
Yes, sir.
If there is time and possibility, please allow it.
I've unmuted her. She can ask the question.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Namaste. At the outset, I extend my warm pranams to Badrinath Garu. He was my guru earlier when I practiced. Now I'm working as an additional district judge at West Godavari district of Andhra Pradesh. It is a rare opportunity to hear him. Whenever he deals a subject, it will be so lucid that there will not be any scope to ask a question. He clarifies each and every aspect, but still, having given me an opportunity to raise a question, I wanted to put it.
Yes, you're welcome.
Badrinath Garu, as you said that discoveries, we pose certain questions. Either plaintiff or defendant would pose questions, interrogatories. And you say that they are binding. Suppose intentionally either plaintiff or defendant use a false answer. Can we take any criminal action against them? Either parties can institute any criminal action against them, or can we say that this part of answer which was given is false to the pleadings or the evidence to be let in? So that has to be charged with.
Mr. Sharma, well, you happen to be a junior in my office. That's why he spoke well about me. Anyway, thank you. But coming to the question that you have put in, see,
Yeah.
you see the purpose here is not to penalize the parties for the answer they have given. This is a different admission than an admission in the trial or a a misleading statement in the trial. After all, in a civil dispute, normally perjury role will not be there. Unless in a different scenario that we have to visualize the facts clearly and then come into it. But if you see order 10, both under the interrogatories, refusal to answer interrogatories or refusal to answer the questions put by the court, the consequences are not drastic.
Yeah.
After all, order 10 itself is not mandatory. It is a enabling provision to facilitate reduction of burden on the trial and for contributing an expeditious trial. So a person gives an answer knowingly wrong. You record that what all the section says, substance of the examination to be noted, reduced to writing by the judge and shall form part of the record. So you can use it for the demeanor of the witness later. At the time when you pass a judgment, take his cross-examination answers and take this. Probably you can use whether this witness is trustworthy or not. See, in civil matters, it is not proved beyond doubt. No, it is preponderance of probability. So when you elicit whether this man is speaking truth or not, probably this recording may help. You may rely on it. But I don't think that it would lead to a situation where a court can be the complainant as an offense committed in the court and go under 185 or so. Lawyers on the penal side, criminal side would be able to tell that and institute a complaint. I don't think. Then that's a deterrent thing and that defeats the object. I don't think so. You can at best, see, it's no doubt form part of the record. Answer given by him. At best, it can be used at the time of passing the final order or appreciating the evidence, which will be up to trial. This is what I have not come across a precedent where, because I happen to see some commentary within my reach, as I'm not having any library at this place I'm now in. So, but to my knowledge is that I'll go through further investigation. In case I come across a different view, I will interact with you on that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. There are multiple comments in the chat box here, thanking you for the presentation today and commenting with really nice comments on it. I would like to read one particular comment from Ms. V. Rajeshwari. The trial part has been explained very interestingly with relevant case laws. The difference between cross-examination and interrogatory is explained beautifully, and she thanks you for it. And there are also comments saying that your lecture has been especially helpful for budding lawyers. That being said, thank you, sir, for attending today. Addressing us today for this session. Thank you.
Thank you.